Okay, so today I will be talking about the promise of ecological law, the ethical and legal implications of state non-action in protecting the foundations of life. What's really nice about being able to present after our launch in Siena is that throughout this talk I will be incorporating some of the main ideas and principles that came from Siena, and I'll try to highlight exactly where those come in. I use state non-action in particular as a point of focus because I think it gets to denial of responsibility, a denial of truth and science, a denial of integrity. It's one I think of the most targeted attacks against fundamental or historically known environmental law. So, okay. So just to give a brief overview, I'll look at the promise of ecological law, and this will be a mix. It's going to acknowledge some of what we're up against, some of the obstacles, but also some of the ways forward. So I'll start with the promise of ecological law, ethics, governance, and the rule of law, what I mean by those terms, some ethical principles of ecological law and governance that are from my own body of work, the Biosphere Ethics Initiative, and these are rooted in ethics and action, on the ground principles from real people, real communities. And then procedural considerations of ecological law, substantive considerations of ecological law, what I mean by the responsibilities of the state, and one really, really amazing case that all of you, if you're not already, need to become very familiar with, which is the Kelsey Cascadia Rose Juliana et al. VUS8 case. It's the climate change kids case, is often what it said shorthand, set for trial against Trump on February 2018. So the promise of ecological law, ethics, governance, and the rule of law, what do we mean by these terms? Ethics is the domain of inquiry that examines claims about what is right or wrong, just or unjust, obligatory or non-obligatory. Environmental ethics expands the domain of inquiry into our obligations to the entire community of life, for the sustainability and flourishing of the entire community of life. Ethics are the foundation for the rule of law, or the body of rules, policies, and programs that guide and govern a society in order to best protect that society. Laws guide and are governed by all sectors of society, civil society, private sector, local, national, global government, and NGO bodies, educational, cultural, and historic institutions. Governance includes the institutions of governments, as well as the institutions of civil society and the creation, implementation, and enforcement of the rule of law, including law and policies. So we could have just been the Ecological Law Association, and adding that one fun little term, governance, opened us up, I think, into the most important part of what we're doing, which is getting on the ground and going after policies themselves. All decisions, whether translated into laws, policies, or organizational or individual action, have ethical underpinnings. So what we're saying is every decision that we make has ethical underpinnings. So it is up to us to raise those, to highlight them. So we seek to draw out those ethical underpinnings and bring them to the forefront. And applied ethics is the process of using ethical engagement to inform and guide future action. So this is just one of many methodologies that is available to us to advance ecological law. So some of the ethical principles of ecological law and governance from my own body of work, the Biosphere Ethics Initiative. We are an international soft law program that seeks to witness, highlight, and share ethical principles of biodiversity conservation. We do this through relatos, that's our methodology, of local meetings with global experts that highlight ethics in action. We've had 6 to date. I can't unfortunately go into the details of all of them, but I will show you some of the main ethical principles from them. And then we also share their stories at international fora, such as the UNFCCC that's coming up in Bonn, the Convention on Biological Diversity, and IUCN. And IUCN has adopted the Biosphere Ethics Initiative as part of its one policy program. So some of the foundational principles of the BEI that we should all love here: ecological solidarity between humans and nature, with the obligation to respect and the compassion of, this little box there, with the obligation to respect and the compassion of love is the basis for genuine care of living beings, places, and people. love for the beauty and gift of the natural world with all of its living diversity, or biophilia, love for our places in our homes, or locophilia, and love for the people of today and tomorrow, sociophilia. And I argue that we even need a bit of egophilia, because we can't really do our work well for others if we don't have a little bit of love for ourselves. I think it's important throughout this entire process, as we're developing what we mean by ecological law, to also look to people who would be the godfathers of this way of thinking. And I've been getting into Humboldt quite a bit lately. Of course, there's Leopold, Schweitzer, Viermontree. We could even have one of our godfathers be Bosselman. You know? So I think it's important to look at also what they've been saying over the past few centuries. And Humboldt has a great perspective. Nature must be experienced through feeling. There was even a letter that he had wrote to Darwin at one time saying that, I appreciate so much how you combine science with imagination. And my law students, they're always a little funny about bringing love into law, but it's necessary for motivation. Okay. We must always strive to attain social, economic, and environmental justice, and support for these and other universal human rights for poverty, environmental, and human health are inextricably linked and cannot be solved separately. There is strength in diversity, language, belief, practice, biocultural diversity, necessary for biological evolution, support scientific knowledge, and nurture solutions. It is danger for the future of life to commodify life, which includes placing a price on nature, appropriating life processes, and synthetically creating new life forms and introducing them into the biosphere. Scientific research and the application of scientific knowledge is not value neutral. We have a responsibility to act with precaution when faced with scientific uncertainty. Ecological reconciliation is necessary for a sustainable future. We must confront the truth of the past, the harms to humans and nature in the name of humans and/or nature, and reconcile ourselves with those impacts. We must be able to forgive and move forward without blame or guilt. This clearly came from our time in South Africa. Both animals and humans have sacred spaces in nature that are vital to their lives and healthy development. People from all backgrounds and ages carry wisdom that is important for our common future, and we must build trust among generations, cultures, and professions. Play in and around nature is vital to the healthy development of children and adults, and this goes back to mixing science and imagination. If we protect the vulnerable people, places, species, and societies, we protect everyone and everything. And the media has a key ethical role in environmental education, impact, empowerment, and the truth of what they report. Just to give a little images, I'm going to quickly go through these and where they came from, but all of these principles came from real people, real stories, real actions. This is South Africa, conservation management through social upliftment. You cannot separate conservation management without lifting up the community. When women succeed, communities succeed. Almost every single relato, it had women leading the efforts. The concept of touching the earth lightly when we build structures. Ecological reconciliation, being honest with our past in order to move forward. Care and respect for other species. These were just little holes that critters can go in and out of, but they took the time to make those within the building structures themselves. Conservation promotes integrity. It's about managing change, not trying to reach some stable, steady state. We cannot be naive to the role of power and politics as a daily obstacle. I specialize in international environmental law and ethics, which naturally takes me very deep into corruption. Protect vulnerable people, places, and species. Know your history, the importance of place. This is all part of the ecological whole. Promote cultural development and self-awareness. Sacred stands, sacred workforce. Yes, the steel mills did do damage, but they were also key to the identity of the community. Promote an ecological literacy campaign. The importance of hands-on immersive education and play for children and adults. Know your place in the world. Water is life. Create spaces for ethical and spiritual engagement and dialogue. For our Jordan Alato, every living thing is in a state of prayer. Islam is the basis for ethics and ecology. Use ethics as a common ground to bring people together. In the spirit of Musalaha, we must be able to forgive and move forward without blame or guilt. Everything is created by measure and order, and everything is interdependent with everything else. This is Humboldt right here. Water is the bloodline. The loss of water is the loss of life, the loss of identity, the loss of culture. This is the blood, the water of the ecological whole. These are the components. Eco peace. Water scarcity provides opportunities for peace. That completely flips the narrative that with a reduction of resources that there'll be more cause for civil war and strife. Wise consumption. Economic empowerment through eco-employment. Social responsibility measures. Respect for all the community of life. Do not harm or cause harm to others. These were creatures that had been saved from illegal trafficking under the CITES Convention that had gone through Jordan and then were rescued. Generational knowledge sharing, the wisdom of the adult, the hope of the youth. For the Rio State Relato, human dignity is a central ecological value. We learned about ecology in extremes. We have no water, we have too much water. Here they had, where the mountains literally fell apart and had massive landslides down onto the town. And everyone had a story to share. Everyone had a connection with what had happened. This was a little bit of a difficulty when we approached them, and it's common in many parts of the world that they thought that this 1 in 500-year storm was an act of God, which doesn't necessarily motivate change of behavior. So, you know, in respecting cultural beliefs, we also had to say, you know, this is where the global experts are important that come into these meetings to talk about climate change and how these storms will become more frequent and that there must be proper planning. This is the story of Gramacho, which was the world's largest landfill. It closed recently, but an entire town of people had grown up around it, the catadores, to pick recyclable items. But they were seen as throwaways. These humans were seen as throwaways. They were saying, we need ethics. We must rethink our concept of planning. This is a problem for them and for the whole world. And when there's an internal shift at the family level, shifting behavior within homes, leading to change outside. What's so great about meeting with these small local communities is you think they may just be lost in just, you know, the day-to-day work of, and understandably so, of a small local community. But they connected themselves to the whole, to the global world. Success for us is important to everyone. And when they say everyone, they mean everyone on this planet. This is actually one of my favorite pictures of all the work I've ever done. And she said, my name was dirty because I couldn't pay my bills. I can now make my home better. They rescued my life. They rescued my citizenship. And this was all surrounding conservation programs and policies that took into care women. They provided daycares. They made sure to give them the money to take home, because when you give women money, it's more likely to be invested into the community. Lastly, with Gangjeong Village, a naval base was coming into a very small indigenous community that lived in harmony with nature. And what we try to promote over and over is that environmental security is national security. Our way of life has a right to exist. Our sacred waters have a right to exist. So now you see some of the rights of nature language coming through. Our sacred Gurumbi, our sacred spaces have a right to exist. We must listen to and learn from indigenous peoples. We must build global solidarity for the community of life. And environmental organizations in particular have an ethical duty to raise the awareness of vulnerable people, places, and species and protect communities that live in harmony with nature. and they should be approached and be part of our campaign to move from environmental law to ecological law. World peace begins at Gwiazdon. Again, you have one little place that saw their value to the world. Okay, so some procedural considerations of ecological law. I'll go through these quickly, precisely, I hope. ELCO's work is based on an earth democracy philosophy. Everyone in our societies has a role to play in good environmental governance. Local, national, global methodology. We must examine the differences and similarities without ever losing sight of the ecological whole. We work within existing systems while also pushing their boundaries and advancing new legal and governance structures within new paradigms to best promote the foundations of life. We must draft laws and policies through diverse stakeholders, multidisciplinary, cross-sectoral. We need to review the negotiation methodology. There must be some types of bottom lines, because when we go into negotiations, rarely does the end result represent anything that would support any protection of life. And there needs to be a change, whether it's a change of power structure and power dynamics of negotiations. And this is for treaty bodies or for laws, but there needs to be a bottom line. Give nature a voice at the decision-making table. Give future generations a voice at the decision-making table. Recognize mass loss of habitat and biodiversity, and how we move from there, how we halt that, and we move from there to revival, rehabilitation, and protection. This came from our WWF colleague a couple of days ago. She's like, we cannot be blind here. There's massive loss happening right now. And before we can even talk about protection, we need to talk about how we stop this. We need to halt it and then go into rehabilitation and then protection. Transition away from cost-benefit analysis and other archaic means that come out of the environmental law world. We need to heighten the role of the state as the protector of the general public, which is a little bit what this goes into, and change our notions of state sovereignty. And this is ecological law and governance. The whole shapes the parts, not the parts shape the whole. And for every decision we must ask, how does this decision affect the foundations of life? Some substantive considerations. Humans are one part of the interconnected, interdependent Earth community. Ecological law and governance actively promotes ecological citizenship. The focus of all governance structures is to live within our ecological limits in harmony with nature. We challenge notions of growth. We aim to develop laws where ecological health and health biodiversity are the fundamental parameters of social and economic governance. We need to ensure strong links between scientific evidence and law. We must also embrace the promise of the nature of nature. The foundations of life are connected to everything, and so we must connect it to everything. We must be creative in how we approach all areas of law and governance. The promise of life, ecological causes are life causes. They bring life together with life. So now the responsibilities of the state as the protector of the realm, protects citizens from external threats, violence, i.e. other states, individuals, protects the foundations of life. This is their job. This is the job of the nation state. Are they doing this? The state is the provider, provides goods and services that individuals cannot provide individually for themselves, such as a healthy environment, roads, water, sanitation. Provides an infrastructure of care to allow citizens to flourish economically and socially. Are they doing this? The state is the investor. Invest in the environment, healthcare, education, immigration, open borders to allow citizens to be resilient and better provide for themselves. Is your nation state doing this? Now, mine is not, which is partially why I chose this as my most recent area of scholarship. Culpability. So here we're looking at trying to expand notions of environmental law towards ecological law and bringing in culpability of the state not doing the things I just listed. Being held morally and legally responsible for action and inaction. Inaction is failing to be other regarding enough, that they just don't care about the other. A willful neglect of duty of care to protect, to lessen the amount of harm suffered by its citizens. And then they are to also just this part of the social social contract or covenant that we have with one another. Their job is to create laws and enforce those laws. Are they doing that? These 5 points are a little biased just from me coming from the south of you guys, your southern neighbor. But what's going on with the Climate Change Accord? What does that mean when we pull out from that? What does it mean when we manipulate and disempower environmental protection laws? What does it mean when we open permanently protected lands to resource extraction? What about when we dismantle ethics, justice, and civil rights departments that cannot be separated from the ecological whole? And what does it mean when we deny truth, science, and evidence-based methodologies? That should be criminal behavior, actionable criminal behavior. Lastly, I just want to introduce this case to you. I have a few other cases, but I know that I don't have the time to go into them. But if you could just jot it down and look through, much of my scholarship is comparative law and policy, and this is some of the best language that I have seen in a very, very long time. It's Kelsey Cascadia Rose Juliana et al. The United States of America et al. This action is of different order than the typical environmental case. It alleges that defendants' actions and inactions have so profoundly damaged our home planet that they threaten plaintiffs' fundamental constitutional rights to life and liberty. And just a little bit, I'll go through here, but so you can just see a little bit of what this is. It was a climate scientist out of NASA with 21 youth plaintiffs that came forward and filed the case at the time against President Obama. And then all these defendants here, January 14th, jumped on excitedly to be a part of this. And you'll see the trend actually shifts a bit. Churches came on as friends, women came on as friends, and then there were oral arguments. And this is part of the oral arguments when they actually talked to the kids themselves. So despite knowing the dangers of CO2 pollution, the government did nothing to prevent this harm. What I have experienced will not exist for my children. And these are teenagers saying this. The personal benefit by the executive from the fossil fuel industry, now is the time, it's a constitutional obligation of the federal government to protect us. The vulnerability aspect, as you saw, came also from an ethical principle. We need to take steps to protect the vulnerable. So this is a little bit more from the order that unfortunately I can't go through entirely today, but there's so much good stuff and it's not that long. Please, I can't say that it's enough to just find the PDF, or I can share it with Jeff and he can share it with others. But they did, so they satisfied causation, which was the first step through, and then they made due process claims. And this may be key for how we evolve from environmental to ecological. Due process and probably public trust are going to be the two biggies, maybe public trust even more so. So they alleged a stable climate system is a necessary condition to exercising other rights, and that the government knowingly endangered its citizenry by approving and promoting fossil fuel development. And to hold otherwise would be to say the Constitution affords no protection against the government's knowing decision to poison the air its citizens breathe or the water its citizens drink. And ultimately, we have a new fundamental right. And if you saw me now, I'd be jumping up and down cheering. To a stable climate system. Okay. So some other key language that's quite applicable to us. The right of future generations to a balanced and healthful ecology is so basic that it need not even be written in the Constitution, for it is assumed to exist from the inception of mankind. So don't feel a loss if the pretty language is not in your Constitution. Let's just go down a little bit more. Okay, so this also speaks directly to today. So the judge, in closing, wrote, the current state of affairs reveals a wholesale failure of the legal system to protect humanity from the collapse of finite natural resources by the uncontrolled pursuit of short-term profits. This is ecological law. This is ecological economics. This is exactly what we're talking about. And here it's stated in a case. The modern judiciary has enfeebled itself to the point that law enforcement can rarely be accomplished by taking environmental predators to court. environmental law is not doing its job. Of course, when Obama tried to dismiss it, and then Trump won the election, and Trump has tried to dismiss it over and over again. But what was interesting during this transition, so the government had been denying certain elements of this, and then when they saw that Trump had won the election, they went back to the court and amended their complaint, almost agreeing with every point that the kids had made, knowing that the Trump administration would try to walk away from it. So they tried to do the best they could towards the end. And this is just some of the horribleness we're dealing with now coming out of this. The alleged valuing of short-term economic interest despite the cost of human life. So, okay, so please, please, please read this. Another case came out of Pakistan, which was similar, and then India, which is similar, of this idea of the state not doing its jobs. We're talking about expanding existing bodies. The International Criminal Court just did, and it was expanding what it's able to prosecute into environmental crimes. And the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, there's a movement here as well to expand its use. And voila, I am done. Thank you so much.